May 1972. The central highlands of South Vietnam. The air inside the T-54 tank is a suffocating blend of diesel fumes, cordite, and the unwashed sweat of men who have been on the offensive for weeks. Outside, the tropical heat is oppressive, but inside the steel hull, it is an oven. This is the Easter Offensive. The North Vietnamese army, supported by massive shipments of Soviet heavy armor, is no longer fighting a guerrilla war in the shadows. They have emerged into the open, moving in conventional columns, intent on crushing the Army of the Republic of Vietnam through sheer armored force. For the tank commander peering through his periscope, confidence is high. The Americans are withdrawing, their ground troops are leaving, the South Vietnamese forces are reeling backward. The Soviet-built T-54 tank is a predator here. Its 100mm main gun can punch through anything the South Vietnamese have. The commander scans the tree line ahead. It is over 3,000 meters away, a safe distance. In the calculus of tank warfare, distance is life. At 3,000 meters, he is immune. American M48 Patton tanks cannot hit him accurately from that range. Recoilless rifles are useless. Even if the enemy is hiding in that distant scrub, they are toothless. He orders the driver to advance. The tracks grind the red earth, the engine roaring with the distinct deep thrum of Soviet engineering. They are invincible. Then, without warning, the world ends. There is no sound of a distant cannon firing. There is no telltale puff of white smoke from a muzzle flash in the tree line. There is no screech of an incoming artillery shell. There is only a sudden, violent, overpressure event. In a fraction of a second, a shaped charge jet of molten copper, moving at hypersonic speeds, slams into the front glacis plate of the T-54 tank. The armor, designed to deflect solid shot, is useless against this physics-defying lance of heat. The jet burns through the steel like a blowtorch through wax. It enters the fighting compartment, spraying white-hot spalling and turning the air instantly into fire. It finds the ammunition rack. The catastrophic cook-off is immediate. The turret of the 36-ton beast is ripped from the hull and tossed into the air like a discarded toy. To the tank crews behind the lead vehicle, it looks like an act of God. 1 second their comrade is advancing, the next he is a burning pyre. The column halts, panic sets in. Commanders throw open their hatches, binoculars raised, desperately scanning the horizon. Where did the shot come from? They look at the tree line, 3 kilometers away. Nothing. No tanks. No artillery. No smoke. "Sniper!" one yells over the radio, but the logic doesn't hold. Snipers don't decapitate tanks. Maybe it was a mine. But the lead tank had cleared that path. Then, they see it. Or they think they see it. A flicker of movement in the extreme distance. Not a muzzle flash, but a small, erratic light. A red flare, perhaps. It dances in the air, silent and slow, drifting toward the second tank in the column. It doesn't look like a projectile. It looks like an insect. It moves with a strange, unnatural purpose, correcting its course, dipping and rising as if guided by an invisible hand. The crew of the second T-54 tank stares at it, mesmerized. It is too slow to be a shell. It is too quiet to be a rocket. The red light merges with their optics. Impact. The second tank erupts in flames. This is the terror of the impossible. The North Vietnamese crews and their embedded Soviet advisors are witnessing the annihilation of their armored superiority, but they cannot identify the executioner. They are being killed by something that outranges their guns, makes no sound when fired, and strikes with surgical precision. The radio net dissolves into chaos. The invincibility of the Soviet heavy armor has been shattered in less than 60 seconds by a ghost. This was the moment the rules of armored warfare changed forever. The moment the tank ceased to be the apex predator of the modern battlefield. Before we unravel the mystery of the weapon that terrified the Soviet Union and changed the course of the Cold War, make sure to subscribe to Cold War Impact for more deep dives into the military technology that defined a generation. Back in the chaos of Kontum, the confusion is total. The remaining tanks pop smoke and reverse, grinding their gears in a desperate bid to find cover. But the terrain offers no safety against this new threat. Soviet military doctrine relies on known variables. You calculate armor thickness, muzzle velocity, and effective range. If your gun shoots further than the enemy's gun, you win. If your armor is thicker than their shell's penetration capability, you survive. The advisors on the ground are scrambling to report this anomaly to Moscow. They need answers. A frantic after-action report is drafted by an intelligence officer attached to the NVA regiment. He inspects the wreckage of the lead T-54 tank after the sun goes down. The destruction is absolute, but the entry hole is small, barely the size of a fist. This indicates a high-explosive anti-tank warhead, or HEAT. But HEAT rounds are usually fired from shoulder-mounted RPGs or low-velocity tank guns with limited range. To hit a moving target with a low-velocity HEAT round at 3,000 meters is ballistically impossible. The arc of the shell would be massive, the wind would push it off course. It would require a lucky shot, 1 in a million. But this wasn't luck. 2 tanks were destroyed in rapid succession. The accuracy was absolute. The advisor notes something else, the angle of impact. It didn't come from a high angle like an airstrike or artillery. It came from a flat trajectory, almost parallel to the ground, but slightly elevated. Witnesses reported seeing a helicopter, a UH-1 Huey, the workhorse of the American war, a transport chopper, slow, loud, and vulnerable. The Soviets know the Huey. It carries machine guns and unguided rockets. It is not a tank killer. A T-54 tank can shoot a Huey out of the sky with its heavy anti-aircraft machine gun if the chopper gets close enough to use its rockets. But the witnesses say the Huey was hovering miles away. It was a speck in the sky. It never came close. It just sat there, hovering above the tree line, seemingly observing the battle. How could a transport helicopter, hovering safely out of range of anti-aircraft fire, destroy 2 heavy tanks with pinpoint accuracy? The report makes its way up the chain of command, eventually reaching intelligence desks in Hanoi and Moscow. The tone of the report is clinical, but the implication is terrifying. The Americans have deployed something new. A weapon that creates a kill zone 3 times larger than previously thought possible. The Soviet analysts are skeptical. They dismiss the reports as battlefield hysteria. The Americans are using air power, they argue. 4 Phantoms dropping laser-guided bombs. But the tank crews know better. They saw the red light. They saw the slow, silent approach of death. They know that whatever killed them was not a bomb falling from the sky. It was something that looked them in the eye from across the valley and reached out to touch them. The mystery deepens a week later near the city of Anlok. Another major offensive. Another column of Soviet-supplied armor, this time lighter PT-76 amphibious tanks, is moving through a rubber plantation. The terrain is different here, dense, cluttered. Suddenly, a jeep, a standard American M151 utility vehicle, careens around a corner, hundreds of meters away. It's a soft target. A burst of machine gun fire should shred it, but the jeep stops. A soldier in the back manipulates a strange tubular device mounted on a pedestal. The tank commander laughs. A jeep against a tank? There is a whoosh, a dry pop. The same red light appears, the same erratic dancing flight path. The wire-thin connection between the jeep and the projectile is invisible to the naked eye. The PT-76 tank commander has time to blink. The explosion rips the amphibious tank apart. The jeep reverses and vanishes into the rubber trees before the column can return fire. It is happening everywhere. From the air, from the ground. The enemy is using a weapon that defies the physics of ballistics. No recoil, no heavy barrel, just a tube and a terrifyingly accurate result. The Soviet advisors are no longer skeptical. They are alarmed. They need to capture one of these weapons. They need to know how the Americans have managed to extend the hand of death to 3,000 meters without using a heavy gun. The data they are gathering suggests a guidance system that shouldn't exist, something that allows a human operator to steer a missile all the way to impact. But guidance requires computers. Computers are heavy, they require power. How are the Americans putting a guidance computer inside a missile small enough to be fired from a jeep? The investigation into the red light of death begins. And what they are about to discover will send a chill through the entire Warsaw Pact. The monsoon rains have begun to wash the blood from the soil of Anlok, but the wreckage remains. Soviet technical advisors, moving under the cover of a ceasefire, walk the kill zones. They are not looking for bodies, they are looking for the mechanism of this ghost. The destruction of the T-54 tanks is absolute, but the method remains a puzzle. One advisor, crouched in the mud near a smouldering hull, finds the first physical clue. It isn't a piece of advanced circuitry. It is a wire, a thin copper filament, barely thicker than a human hair. It is tangled in the bushes, draped over the tank treads, and stretches back into the distance, disappearing into the tall elephant grass. He pulls on it. It seems endless. It runs all the way from the impact site back toward the enemy lines. The realization is immediate. The projectile was tethered. This discovery shifts the investigation from ballistics to electronics. A wire means a connection. It means that for the entire flight time of the projectile, the launcher was talking to the missile. But this creates a bigger engineering contradiction. To guide a missile over 3,000 meters requires complex corrections. The missile must adjust for wind, gravity, and the movement of the target. To do this through a wire implies that a computer is processing the data. In 1972, computers are massive. The Soviet guidance computers fill entire rooms or large trucks. Yet, the reconnaissance reports state that this weapon is being fired from open jeeps and simple tripods. How have the Americans shrunk a guidance computer into a box small enough for a soldier to carry? The advisors suspect a different trick. They hypothesize that the Americans are using a beam-riding technology riding a radar wave, but their sensors show no radar emissions. The battlefield is silent in the electromagnetic spectrum. The mystery tightens. They are facing a weapon that leaves no radar signature, makes no sound, and uses a physical wire to deliver instructions from a computer that shouldn't exist. The North Vietnamese scouts are ordered to capture a unit at any cost. They need the hardware. They need to see the brain that is outsmarting their armor. Opportunity strikes near a rubber plantation. A jeep carrying the weapon is ambushed. The crew is eliminated, and the device is thrown clear. It is damaged, covered in mud, but the optical unit and the launch tube are intact. It is rushed to a secure bunker. The Soviet engineers prepare to disassemble it. They expect to find miniaturized processors or some alien alloy. They are about to discover that the secret isn't in what the Americans added. It is in what they removed. In a sterile room, the casing of the captured guidance unit is stripped away. The engineers stare at the components. There is no radar, there is no supercomputer. What they find is a baffle. There is a high-quality optical sight for the gunner, and next to it, a second, darker lens, a second eye. They trace the wiring. This second eye isn't looking at the target. It is fixed in parallel with the gunner's crosshairs, but it is sensitive only to a specific frequency of infrared light. They examine the back of a recovered missile casing and find an infrared beacon, a lamp. The pieces snap together. The brilliance of the American design is not in raw computing power, but in automation. The engineers realize why their own Saga missiles are failing while this weapon succeeds. The Soviet Saga requires the soldier to be a pilot. The soldier must use a joystick to manually fly the missile, correcting its erratic path, while simultaneously watching the tank. It is a mental juggling act. Under fire, human error is inevitable, and most Saga missiles miss. But this American system, the TOW, has removed the pilot. The operator does not fly the missile. He simply looks at the tank. He keeps the crosshairs on the metal beast. That is his only job. The second eye on the launch unit watches the missile for him. It tracks that infrared beacon on the tail. The box calculates the difference between where the gunner is looking and where the missile is flying. If the missile drifts left, the box sends a signal down the wire, go right. It is a closed-loop feedback system. The Soviet analysts are stunned. This is SACLOS, semi-automatic command to line of sight. They know the theory, but they didn't believe it could be ruggedized for the jungle. The implications are terrifying. If the operator doesn't need to be a pilot, he doesn't need months of training. You can take a farm boy, give him 2 hours of instruction, and tell him, point and shoot. The machine corrects for the wind. The machine corrects for the shaky hands. The machine guarantees the kill. They have automated the skill of killing. But just as they understand the mechanics, the final piece of the puzzle falls into place. They look at the engagement maps. They see attacks reported from angles that are impossible for ground troops. The system is stable. It is electronic. It doesn't rely on a soldier's steady footing. And if it doesn't need a steady soldier, it can be mounted on something that moves, something that flies. The engineers realize that the Americans haven't just given this weapon to the infantry. They have likely integrated it into their helicopters. The realization comes too late. The mystery is solved, but the tactical nightmare is about to begin. The final curtain of this mystery is not drawn in a laboratory, but in the sky above Kontum on the morning of May 2nd, 1972. The North Vietnamese army, frustrated by the inexplicable losses of their lead elements, decides to gamble everything. They launch a massive, coordinated assault. This is not a probing attack. It is a sledgehammer. A column of T-54 tanks and PT-76 amphibious tanks, supported by infantry, rolls out of the tree lines, intent on overrunning the city. From the perspective of the Soviet advisors, this is the moment of truth. They believe that sheer mass will overcome the trick the Americans are using. Even if the Americans have a few wire-guided teams on the ground, they cannot stop a tidal wave of steel. The logic of the Second World War dictates that if you throw enough armor at a problem, the problem breaks. But the Americans are not playing by the rules of 1945. High above the battlefield, the 1st Combat Aerial Tau Team, a unit so new it barely exists on paper, arrives on station. They are flying UH-1B Hueys, but these are not the standard transport mules of the war. These helicopters have been jury-rigged with the XM-26 armament subsystem. Hanging off the side of each helicopter are 3 long green tubes. Inside the cockpit, the gunner is not gripping a door gun. He is peering into the stabilized sight we analyzed in the lab. The Soviet tank commanders look up. They see the helicopters. They are 3,000 meters away, specks against the clouds. The commanders check their rangefinders. The heavy 12.7mm anti-aircraft guns, mounted on the tank cupolas, have an effective range of maybe 1,500 meters against a moving target. The helicopters are safe. They are untouchable. The Soviet doctrine says, ignore the helicopters until they close in for a rocket run. But the helicopters don't close in. They stop. They hover. They hang in the air like vultures waiting for a carcass. Then, the slaughter begins. From the tubes on the Hueys, the missiles erupt. The rocket motor burns for just 1.6 seconds, a quick flash, accelerating the missile to nearly 1,000 feet per second. Then, the motor cuts out. The missile coasts. This is the genius of the design. Because the motor burns out so quickly, there is no smoke trail to obscure the gunner's vision. There is no bright exhaust plume for the enemy to target. There is just a small, silent dart gliding through the air, trailing 2 thin wires. On the ground, the tank crews see nothing. The first T-54 tank is hit in the turret ring. The shaped charge warhead, packed with 2.4 kilograms of high explosive, detonates. It focuses its energy into a needle of plasma that punches through the heavy cast steel as if it were cardboard. The ammunition inside ignites. The turret flies off. The column halts. The red light is back, but this time it is raining from the sky. The gunners in the helicopters are calm. The stabilization system works perfectly. The vibrations of the rotor blades are isolated from the sight. All they have to do is keep the crosshair on the tank. The computer does the rest. Target destroyed. Tracking next target. It is clinical. It is industrial. It is a turkey shoot. In the span of a few hours, the myth of the Soviet tank armada is dismantled. The Hueys of the 1st Combat Aerial Tau Team destroy T-54 tanks, PT-76 tanks, and trucks with impunity. They do not lose a single aircraft to enemy fire. The Soviet advisors on the ground watch in horror. They are witnessing the death of a doctrine. They realize that their tanks are no longer fighting the enemy, they are merely targets in a shooting gallery. The tanks cannot fight back. They cannot run. They cannot hide. By the end of the day, the burning wreckage of the North Vietnamese armor litters the approaches to Kontum. The offensive is broken. But the true shock of this weapon, the reveal that will keep generals in Moscow awake at night for the next 20 years, is not just the victory in Vietnam. It is the economic reality that has just been exposed. The weapon finally has a name, the BGM 71 Tau. And with that name comes a grim calculation that changes the Cold War forever. A T-54 tank represents decades of industrial output, training, and logistics. It is a heavy, expensive asset. The Tau missile system, however, is cheap. It costs a fraction of the tank it destroys. The exchange rate of war has just collapsed. For decades, the Soviet Union relied on a simple strategic advantage: numbers. They had 40,000 tanks parked behind the Iron Curtain. NATO had a fraction of that. The plan was always to rush Europe with an overwhelming tsunami of armor. But the Tau missile changed the equation. Suddenly, NATO didn't need to match the Soviets tank for tank. They just needed to build thousands of these cheap plastic tubes. The Soviet high command realized that their 40,000 tanks were walking into a trap. Every tree line, every ridge, every rooftop could be hiding a weapon that could kill their best tank from 3 kilometers away with a 90% probability of a hit. This triggered a panic in Soviet military engineering. They scrambled to find a solution. They developed reactive armor, those brick-like boxes you see on modern tanks, specifically to stop the shaped charge of the Tau. They developed active protection systems. They frantically built mobile air defense systems. But they were always playing catch-up. In 1972, the Americans proved that you didn't need a tank to kill a tank. You just needed a wire, a steady hand, and a red light. The legacy of that debut in Vietnam is still with us today. If you look at footage from modern conflicts, from the deserts of the Middle East to the fields of Eastern Europe, you will see the descendants of those T-54 tanks exploding. And if you look closely, you will often see the same thing that terrified those crews in 1972, a small, erratic red light dancing on the wind, closing in for the kill. The BGM-71 Tau remains one of the longest-serving guided missiles in history. It survived the Cold War. It outlived the Soviet Union. And it proved once and for all that on the modern battlefield, being big doesn't mean you are safe, it just means you are a bigger target.